Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz and I'm joined by my fantastic co-host. He's really upset that the card Valgavoth Slayer doesn't have the land subtype layer. It's Matt Morgan.
So a buddy of mine recently told me that he didn't really understand how cloning works, and I told him, well, that makes two of us.
Ooh, Matt, I feel like you've just uncovered some really interesting lore about yourself there, actually.
I really could have. Well, I recently I did try to clone a bunch of grizzly bears, and I think it bears repeating that it really made me pause.
Wow. All right. Copy that. So, Matt, what is it that we're talking about?
Roger.
What is it that we're talking about in this week's episode?
Well, this week we've seen a lot of conversations going around about a proposed bracket system, and we want to give some time to kind of weigh out what has been proposed, what we think might be helpful, and just kind of lay out what we would like to see from whatever this power level system is that Wizards of the Coast is currently working on.
Absolutely. This is a very contentious topic, you might say, but it really all is in service of trying to make sure that players can find good games against each other where everyone is feeling like, yeah, these decks are suited for a really cool match. How do we focus on helping players find the fun? There have been a lot of proposals out there. We'll go over some pros and cons of them and maybe a few other alternatives and pros of cons of those too. But we got some stuff to get to before we get into our main topic, I think.
Well, first off, we definitely want to say that we are proud members of Team Ultimate Guard. If you caught us at MagicCon Vegas recently, you may have caught us using these handsome deck boxes, these bolder deck boxes. I absolutely love them. Sidewinders, whatever it is. You have cards out there. They're expensive. You need to protect them. You need katana sleeves that are going to be the best sleeves out there. They're going to protect your cards. They're going to shuffle just so nice.
Everything
about Ultimate Guard, just like they keep getting better and better. They have licensed art now from Wizards of the Coast for Bloomburrow, for Duskmourn. So if you want some of your favorite art from those sets on some of these Sidewinder deck boxes, it's just a win-win situation. Ultimate Guard they have it all going on there. So make sure you check them out for the best protection for all of your cards.
And if you want to support the show, you can do so in a myriad of ways. Liking and subscribing is huge. Leaving us a review is an enormous help, really helps us boost up in the algorithm, so to speak. But there are also ways like patreon.com/EDHRECast if you want to support us that way too. We have a bunch of cool Patreon perks, including access to our Patreon Discord. It's a fantastic time and we appreciate the support there so much. And one of our favorite tiers is the Patreon shout out. Matt, who are we shouting out on this week's episode?
Well, for this week, we're going to give a very special shout out to William Lipolis, who don't give your mom any lip, but be like Mr. Lipolis, and go to patreon.com/EDHRECast. We just appreciate the support so much, William. Thank you so much. And just all of our patrons out there. We literally could not be here if it weren't for the patrons. So thank you for making the show possible. And thank you, William, as well.
Yeah, show does not happen without all of y'all. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, Matt. So let's get into our topic now. We're talking about brackets, but also what it is that we want from a power level system. Obviously, the bracket 1, bracket 2, bracket 3, bracket 4, that's a thing that Wizards has put forward as an idea of a way to try and align commander players' expectations for their games with each other. But, I think we might need to actually start from base principles in terms of why is a system like that even necessary? And what are the things that we hope this conversation can even get to in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. And it's really important to kind of ask ourselves before we get into this, because there have been a lot of conversations that other content creators have had. And I think there's been a lot of really good content out there about pros and cons to a bunch of different systems. And I think the main question is, like, do we need one? And I think the question is definitely yes. Like, there needs to be a system in place. I don't know what that final form is going to look like, but absolutely we need something out there to kind of help guide players who don't really know how to navigate finding games. That's just kind of what the whole point is there for. It's kind of like the ban list. The ban list needs to be there to control a base level experience for players playing out in the wild with strangers, not for home play groups where it's just the same 4 people playing all the time.
That's actually an important point to hit on right there. As you've said in many past episodes, the ban list is not even necessarily for you and your playgroup at home. And the rules committee always was aware of that. And I think Wizards is also probably very hyper aware of that too.
Yes.
Play the Magic that you want. No one's enforced. There's no enforcement arm of this. They're not going to bust into your house, bust into your playgroup and say, no, you can't play that. Everyone wants you to be able to play the stuff that you want to play. The issue does come down to how do we navigate this in games with strangers, and having an easy way to try and align those things. That's what what becomes so difficult. And Matt, as you were saying, that's why something like this ends up being pretty necessary.
Yeah, it's super necessary, I would say. And yes, like ideally, I think that the best system in place would be everybody has a really good understanding and a really solid grasp on being able to communicate and just talk to others about their decks. But unfortunately, when you're getting into the game, you're not really familiar with how the pregame conversations go and everything. Having that system in place for those folks that are just getting their feet wet with the format, that is absolutely vital. They need kind of those guardrails. They need something, you know, professional bowlers, they don't need the bumpers on their lanes in order to, you know, bowl a 300. But people who like me, who don't bowl very often and aren't very good at it, we need something to kind of show us, okay, this is kind of where things need to go. And that's why I think it's so important. I see a lot of people saying we don't really need a bracket system. We don't need a power level system. Your play group, I think, is the important distinction. Your play group does not need a power level bracket because you already know each other. You already have that relationship in place where you don't need to kind of have that conversation because it's already been done over hours and hours of playing together.
I mean, Matt, as you were saying before we even actually hit record, you were like, yeah, if I hop into a game with you, Joey, and you pull out your Conrad deck, I already know what to expect.
Yeah.
There's no other conversation that needs to happen. That's not the luxury that we all have when we go to these conventions and play against folks we've never met before. And something that Dana likes to point out as a good example of why commander power levels can be so tricky to navigate, he brings up the example of Vampiric Tutor, a 1-mana tutor, which makes you lose 2 life, put something on top of your deck. That's one of the strongest black cards ever printed. And he points out also that Swords to Plowshares, one of the most famous removal spells, that's one of the strongest white cards ever printed. But their impact on games and their availability to most players are radically different things. And those were even used as example cards in Wizards' proposed bracket system as like what would be a bracket 4 card or a bracket 1 card. Those are 2 of the strongest cards in their respective colors, but wow, do they have a very different effect on deck building. And trying to navigate all of that when we have all of these things available to us in this format, it gets confusing really, really fast. So it makes a lot of sense why we would want something that helps simplify that process so that we can get to the games that we want to have a little bit more quickly.
Yeah, it gets super confusing. I mean, Magic is one of the most complex games out there, and Commander is one of the most complex ways to play that. And so the system, whatever system is in place, what it ends up looking like, it needs to accomplish the main goal of advocating for players who don't know how to advocate for themselves quite yet. That's the ultimate kind of focus I think that the power level should be taking is, how are we taking care of the people who don't know how to take care of themselves and get them into games to have positive experiences when they're out there playing with strangers? When you and I are playing games and you say, I think I want to play this deck, that whole conversation goes out the window because I know what to expect when you say Sir Conrad, you know what to expect when I say Omnath Locus of Rage. Those things, we're advocating for ourselves all the time in that way. And so the players who don't know how to do that, those are the people that should be the number one audience when it comes to whatever this power bracket system is.
And as a small addition to this, I would also say some type of system is helpful in the way that the ban list is helpful to try and limit the damage that can be done by angle shooter type of player.
Strong suggestions, I think, is a really good way to put it. I know that's what the rules committee said for so long, is the ban list is not concrete. It is just very strong suggestions.
Yeah. And the ultimate reality is that, like, no matter what system we do have in place, there are going to be people who are trying to abuse it. There's a difference between a problem system and problem players. And that's something that, like, no number system or no whatever is ever going to, help us navigate. But if we have something that does give people more tools, then hopefully that's pretty cool. And Wizards has proposed this bracket system as one of those potential tools. And Matt, I think it's accurate to say that the internet has some thoughts about that.
The internet has a lot of thoughts about it, and a lot of different people that with voices that I respect and approaches to the game. They've also had a lot of thoughts. And so it's gotten me thinking a lot. And I don't know what the perfect system is. And I think this is a probably good opportunity now for us to kind of explain what this bracket system is for everybody who hasn't been paying attention, because there is a lot to it. And I think that we kind of need to kind of get the ground rules of what Wizards of the Coast has put forward as an early option. Now, we just this morning, when we recorded, Wizards of the Coast did put out an article. Gavin Verhey said that the bracket system and what they wanted to put forth, the system is not ready. They initially wanted to pilot it at MagicCon Las Vegas. It is not going to be ready for that. And so, yeah, it's not a perfect system, and there's a lot of feedback that needs to go into it. The Commander format panel was just announced today, so hopefully there's some more feedback given there. But the bracket system, all we have to go off of right now is what was proposed.
Yeah, Matt, you're kind of giving away how early in advance we record some of our episodes before they see.
I mean, we haven't been shy about that before. We've definitely gotten comments of folks asking questions like why we didn't bring up X card. Like, well, we recorded before preview season started.
Yeah. Happens all the time. The joys of creating content and projecting what might occur in the future. Yeah, so let's actually get to the announcement that they mentioned of the bracket stuff here. And a couple of quotes definitely stand out here. One, as they say, Matt, you pointed this out too, it's nowhere you're near finished yet. Think of this like an open beta is pretty important. But the basic idea is that they're trying to get to here is a more objective approach to deck power level and additional guidance and shared language for players to find games that match the type of game they're trying to play. Here's the idea. There are 4 power brackets, and every commander deck can be placed in one of those brackets by examining the cards and combinations in your deck and comparing them to lists that will need community help to create. You can imagine bracket 1 is the baseline of an average pre-constructed deck, or below, and bracket 4 is high power. For the lower tiers, we may lean on a mixture of cards and a description of how the deck functions, and higher tiers are likely defined by more explicit lists of cards, and they give a couple of examples of what types of cards may be the things to fall in to some of those brackets as well.
Yeah, so they start off by giving us examples of bracket 1 are cards that can easily go in any deck, like Swords of Plowshares, Grave Titan, and Cultivate. So those are 4 staples that we see in so many decks, so many pre-constructed decks. They're readily available. People know what these are. And then they go on to say, whereas bracket 4 would have cards like Vampiric Tutor, Armageddon, and Grim Monolith, cards that make games too much more consistent, lopsided, or faster than the average deck can engage with. And in this system, your deck would be defined by its highest bracket card or cards. And so this makes it clear what cards go where and what kinds of cards you can expect people to be playing at any given power level. So that's a lot. I know we just read effectively an entire article that was printed, but yeah, this is kind of what has gotten a lot of folks up in a tizzy for the past month or so.
So I actually want to ask you just what was your immediate reaction when you saw what they were proposing? And then what is your reaction to it currently now? Like just to start off, positive, negative?
Immediately, I can't say on camera, but I think it boils down to thank goodness they're finally getting rid of precons being a 5. That's been my biggest struggle and flaw for so long with the old 1 to 10 system that people had latched onto and just they never gave that up, and it frustrated me to no end. It led to literally we had an April Fool's joke on EDHREC where you could put in your deck list and we would give you a power level, and it was always my deck is a 7. Every deck was a 7 no matter what. And it was fantastic. But so I want to get rid of the my deck is a 7 thing because as Gavin pointed out in the video that they did, the live stream, he said giving players a midpoint means people are going to gravitate towards that. Yeah. And we want to get rid of that. And so a 4-point scale, I like the initial idea of it. But as with so many early ideas, it needs a lot of refinement.
A lot. I'll say my initial instinct when I saw this was a little bit more exasperated. Matt, I agree with you. The 1 to 10 system, I had made many, like I did not particularly care for.
The 1 to 10 system was terrible. It was fine for the time that it was originally cooked up in, but it was it was terrible for today's game.
We literally have some past episodes going over like self-reporting on like when people were doing spell table tournaments and stuff like that, and like which decks fell into, you know, the 1 to 2, the 3 to 4, and they're like those didn't exist, and so everyone started at 5 and chose 7 as a midpoint. Everything did default to my deck as a 7, and yeah, that system was absolutely flawed. I personally look at the bracket system. My initial instinct is, I think it's the same deal. It's just wearing a different hat now. I have some concerns with it, but I don't want to, like, that's my initial reaction. I do want to get into something positive to start. What are the things that we like about this? Because it feels better to do that before we start poking some holes.
That's fair. So I like that it's not overwhelming. It's simplified. It's very easy to grasp. And you know, 1 through 4, 1 is the lowest, 4 is the highest. There's not a lot of options. There's not a lot of, the more options, the more integers you give, in, you know, especially newer players, the more they're going to get lost. I really like that it's simplified, it's stripped down, and yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Now, there's a lot of questions people can ask right away, and we'll get into those for sure. But I like that initially, like having an even numbered scale, just 1 through 4. There's no middle ground. You can't go to a 7 or a 5 or whatever. I like that. I do like that it's the old system. It like you said, Joey, yes, it is roughly the same system in a different dress, but at least it's a better dress.
You know what? Okay, cool. I'll say also 4 seems like an appropriate number of things to me. Like if I were to take numbers away and just sort of try and describe what are the areas of Commander that I think exist, there would probably only be 4 main delineations in the first place, right? Like there would sort of be the pre-con area, a casual area, something optimized, and then maybe CEDH. Like those do feel like 4 kind of things.
Yeah.
The thing for me, and I'm trying to stay positive. I know this is a little bit of critique. I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. But like, if we already have the descriptive words, then why do we need the numbers? Is kind of my thing. But at the same time, if there is going to be a number, 4 it strikes me as a correct number to aim for at the very least.
Yeah, I do like that. And I don't know if people really remember a few years ago, I want to say it was right before events shut down for a little bit, there was a proposed system for Command Fest that was casual, focused, tuned. Like there's still a 1 through 10 system, but it was 1 to 2s are this, 3s and 4s are this, 5s and 6s are this, 7s and 8s are optimized or tuned, whatever it is, and then 9 and 10 was CEDH. I mean, this is basically just that system. Just you got rid of all the extra numbers and just, you have casual, social, focused, tuned, whatever it is, however you want to word it. That's basically what it is. And so they already kind of had the rough draft of this kind of baking for a while. So without getting too negative, I wish I would have seen a little bit more from that because they've kind of had this in the back pocket for years.
Yeah. We're trying not to get to the negatives yet, Matt. I know that there's a lot of...
I do like the system overall as a starting point. I need to make sure that's said.
I'll get to some of my critiques in a moment. But there's another thing that I do want to say here too about this that I do appreciate is that this particular type of system where if your deck has this in it, then it is considered a 4, and that's like the appropriate place to play it. That does actually do something that a lot of other pregame conversation things cannot accomplish, where it actually encourages a deck building restriction during the deck building stage. By the time that you actually get to a pregame conversation at a table to play some Magic, your list is already locked in. So there's no pregame conversation type of situation that will necessarily always encourage you to have those restrictions or to place a limitation on yourself. A system that actually does do something like this, where it makes you just kind of a little bit reconsider the power distribution of your deck, does actually kind of encourage you to carry a variety of experiences around with you so that you can better fit the tables that you encounter. So that is a thing that I think is probably one of the bigger goals of a system like this. They want to encourage people to not always just play the most optimal and powerful and tuned stuff, to have a variety of experiences instead. And that is something that I do think is a little bit admirable about some systems sort of like this. The execution's not where I want it to be, but I like that there's something that happens in your brain during the deck building stage, if this is the kind of thing that is what you're expected to talk about when you sit down at a table.
Well, we've always talked on this show about being intentional in the deck building process, and I mean, Joey, you and I, like, a big thing for me is intentionality behind really anything in life. And so I agree with you that having some sort of restrictions and considerations that are put into place when you're building the deck, I think that is absolutely something that it's probably something that a lot of players just never get a chance to learn because they're just kind of, okay, well, I opened up these packs and I've never heard of Architect or whatever. And so they're not really putting decks online. They're just kind of going with whatever they have. That's amazing. But giving, again, a tool, this is not the solution, but a tool to get to that solution for everybody, where, yes, we're kind of encouraging you to, okay, if you're looking for this experience, these are some cards to avoid. I think that is a really good suggestion, and having something formal might be helpful for some subsets of players.
And Matt, you just said something there that does kind of make me want to segue into, but what are the critiques, though?
But.
Yeah. And one of my issues with something like this, and I mentioned it in some of our past episodes as well, is does a system like this feel more like a punctuation mark? It's more like a period, more like an exclamation point that ends the pregame chat as just like, oh, it just pointed this a number and then the chat is over, rather than being something that promotes that dialogue.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I have a teensy bit of a worry about. And this does feel a little bit to me like when we get caught up on which cards are 2s and 3s and yada yada, we'll lose the thread of what the ultimate goal is.
Yep.
I want the ultimate goal to be player satisfaction, not did we get all the 3s to line up together. And that feels a little bit like we're missing the forest for the trees. Just a smidgy bit.
To build off that too, though, whatever that power system is that's in place, it's got to be simple and straightforward. And right away, there's a lot of homework that's going to go into this system in its current iteration.
Yeah.
That I don't really love because it's going to put the onus on players like, okay, you need to do more work instead of being able to bust open a precon, sit down and play, or brew up a deck with cards you have laying around and being able to play. And people will open a Vampiric Tutor and a booster pack or whatever and put it into a deck, and like it's going to create these weird situations where like, oh, that's a 4, you said you were playing a 2. There's a lot of homework that needs to go into kind of cultivating the decks. And for newer players, again, I think that's going to lose a lot of folks.
Yeah, this does feel very homeworky. Keeping track of, I mean, as an example, we have salt scores on EDHREC.
Yep.
Matt, do you remember the salt scores of the cards that you're playing in your deck?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
If I ask you to like Ristic study salt score right now, do you know it? The answer is no. Of course we don't.
7. It's a 7. It's always a 7.
Everything's a salt score only goes from 0 to 4, man. How's it getting to a 7?
Shh. That's not that. We don't need to bring that up.
Yeah. And then there's also a little bit of that awkwardness of like, all right, so if I run a single card that is bracket 4 in my deck, that means the entire deck is a 4. Mm-hmm. That's a little bit weird. And frankly, it's kind of odd because I think that there are precons that would probably not fit into the one category that precons are allegedly supposed to be at. Like Fierce Guardianship and Dockside Extortionist and Deflecting SWAT came for precons. But those precons are certainly not something you'd play at the 4 power bracket.
And that's such a weird situation to put people into. I don't love if you have a single card that's a 4, your deck is automatically a 4. That doesn't jive with me. I don't love that. Because again, like, oh my gosh, I open a precon and whatever. That hurts. I don't love that. Especially, what if you never see that card that is a 4? So you're playing at a table with people who intentionally build decks that are going to be that power level, and you just never see the one card that you have in the deck. I don't love that solution.
It strikes me as very, very easy to build a deck full of all 1s and still trounce the entire table with a hyper powerful deck that is just full of cards that weren't given a bunch of numbers. That's another big thing for me.
Yeah, that doesn't take into any account like synergy of all these 1s that could blend together. Like Joey, you and I have been beat by a charge counter deck that was a Kirkesh, and it was absolutely nonsense. It was a bunch of like 10-cent cards, but every card would have been a 1, and we were playing some powerful decks back then.
Not only that, but one of my favorite things about Commander is the fact that you can grab some of those precons right off the shelf and play them against other tuned decks and still have a really, really good time. Mm-hmm. And this has happened to me a couple of times recently. I've gotten to play against the A1 precon pretty recently, the Jeskai Humans deck. I've gotten to play against a Bellow deck recently, and I've recently been playing some of the Duskmourn precons. I played the Valgavoth, the Red-Black Punisher precon recently. And each one of those decks was up against decks that contain Cyclonic Rifts and Fierce Guardianships. And you know what they did? They cleaned house. They did so good. Those precons were fierce. They were fun. Everyone had a blast of a time. It's not that those precons can't keep up, even though like maybe they'd be put at a 1 instead of a 3, but mixing the 1 and the 3 was part of the fun of the format to me. So trying to make those things feel separated or not line up, I don't know that this quite catches the experience that I'm actually after with Commander. And that's another big critique that I've got.
I do agree with you that, yeah, sometimes it's going to be hard to say like, oh, well, these 1s can't really hang with 3s, but like sometimes they absolutely can, but not accounting for these hyper synergistic decks of 1s that can take over. I think there needs to be some sort of consideration for that. And so like maybe we need to stop using some of these early ideas and suggestions that are part of the bracket system right now and not use them as a final word and say that they're set in stone, because like you said, none of these tools should be a punctuation. This should be leading to further discussion. And so you can say, yeah, this deck is a 1, but I played against other people's decks and it always punches up. That's a really good thing that you can kind of say in pregame conversations that isn't giving away too much information about what your deck does either.
Ultimately, another issue is that the way that a card behaves in one deck might be different than the way a card behaves in another deck.
Absolutely. Like
if you've got the Ozolith in your +1 counters deck, Matt, going to be a haymaker. Might be one of the best cards in your entire deck. You put that in my Babala Saga deck, don't do a thing.
Yeah.
Like, it is a powerful card, but that's different than, for instance, some of the cards on the ban list where it's like Biorhythm is going to have an effect on that game no matter whose deck it's in. But like they're trying to like put a number onto the Ozolith. Lord, would I struggle with that. And that is a fear that I would have about some of the cards that do get bracketed or numbered, and whether that would be the case.
Yeah.
And the other final critique I think I'll mention here is that like, this is the system that also requires you to continually add more and more cards to it. As the card pool grows, so too does the necessity of updating this list and adding more numbers and more cards, which just means more homework to look up before you know what your deck is even supposed to land in. And that sounds exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, the growing card pool, I think that's a self-inflicted wound that WotC is putting upon themselves. They're putting out more cards. They have to grade more cards. So like you did this to yourself type of thing. I don't feel too bad about that. And also they have enough tools. I'm sure they have spreadsheets on spreadsheets. It's kind of like Dana has spreadsheets on spreadsheets of tracking all these different cards. So I think the initial homework, getting a bracket system like this in play, is going to be very, very steep. It's kind of like, I would say, my fiance cleaning up her email inbox. It's going to take a lot of work to get those 4,000 emails taken care of. But once it is, it's so much easier to manage as things come into play. And so, yes, it's very daunting giving every single card a rating, but then you're only adding, I would say, like 5 or 6 cards to the 3s and 4s, I would say. At least I hope they're only adding that many. I really hope they're only adding that many per set. But after that, the amount of work to keep up with it goes down significantly. So I'm not too worried about that. But the initial project to get everything rated, that is going to be very steep.
To clean up that email inbox. Listen, I sympathize with the fiance here, actually. My inbox is also pretty messy.
Your home screen gives me anxiety, and I'm a pretty chill person, but you and her both, it is that bad, Joey.
I don't have that many bad notifications on my phone.
It is that bad, listeners. I think we need to pause this sidebar. Let's get to some challenge stats, because I'm going to challenge your home screen. Otherwise, let's challenge the stats real quick. We'll get back into it. Then let's talk a little more positive. Let's talk about what we would like to see from a power level system in the second half of the show, because I think that there's a lot more to talk about there too.
All right, I'll start us off with Challenge the Stats this week. And I've got our listener submitted Challenge the Stats, which comes to us from our Discord patron, New Life Dante, who wants to talk about a very cool piece of tech for Cassetto Orochi Archmage decks, specifically the card Mist Syndicate Naga, which has the creature type Naga Ninja. But the reason that New Life Dante wants to challenge this card is because this card has gotten a creature type update. Naga is not a creature type anymore. They've just been updated to snakes. They were previously just like supposed to be some type of different creature type of like snake people, but now they're just like, no, let's just make it all snakes. It's so much easier when it's all snakes. And this is a very, very cool card that, Matt, you and I have definitely lost a couple of games to, because that's just how good it is.
Just how it goes.
Yeah. Mist Syndicate Naga is a 3-mana snake ninja, 3/1 with ninjutsu for 3 mana. But crucially here, it says whenever Mist Syndicate Naga deals combat damage to a player, you create a token that is a copy of the Mist Syndicate Naga. And this is important because Cassetto Orochi Archmage is a 3-mana 2/2 snake wizard that you can pay 2 mana to give target creature the ability to not be blocked, and if it's a snake, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So this is a really cool, clever way for you to just continually make your Naga unblockable and then make more of them, because they are snakes, they're going to get the buff. This is a great pick. New Life Dante, thank you so much for this challenge. That is a really easy thing to miss, but that creature type update, that's huge. What a great pick.
Yeah, great as always. So Joey, be proud of me, Joey. I'm challenging a card in an Orzhov deck, and it's the card Necromancy, which I know you love. So I
love that card.
Let's give it a quick shout out. So the deck specifically that I want to see Necromancy in more is Victor Valgavoth's Seneschal. So it's the Orzhov commander, 3/3 with Eerie, which is whenever an enchantment you control enters, or whenever you fully unlock a room, it has some abilities where the first time it resolves, you surveil 2. Then the second time, each opponent discards a card. And if it's the third time that turn it resolves, then you put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So obviously there's a lot of what we boomers call constellation triggers. We're getting a whole bunch of enchantments onto the battlefield. And one card that is played in a significant percentage of these decks is Animate Dead. Everybody knows Animate Dead. You're getting a card or a creature card out of your graveyard onto the battlefield. Well, there's another version of this. It's Necromancy. It's 2 and a black for an enchantment that you can cast as though it had flash. But if you did, you have to sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. And then when Necromancy enters the battlefield, basically, you get to reanimate a creature and then put Necromancy on top of it, becomes an aura. You're just reanimating something potentially at instant speed. You look at Victor, which is already surveilling a whole bunch. It's reanimating a whole bunch. Well, this is feeding into both of those strategies that are printed on the card. You're able to grab stuff out of the graveyard, get more eerie triggers. You're just cranking through the deck. It's only played in 26% of Victor decks so far, whereas Animate Dead is over 50%. Those should be significantly closer. I think one thing that is getting in the way of Necromancy being played more is it's only been printed twice.
Yeah.
One was way back in, I want to say Visions, Joey, was that?
Believe so, yeah.
Yeah, Visions or Mirage, something like it was an old card, but it was reprinted in the Murders at Karlov Manor pre-constructed decks, and was printed at Uncommon. And I think a lot of people see Uncommon and they initially kind of write it off. You should not do that with Necromancy. It is so good to instant speed, reanimate something, get an enter the battlefield trigger. That's what this deck is built around doing. There's a ton of decks that are playing all sorts of ETB ability triggers. Why not maximize that? Get some at instant speed for all your blockers. It's just amazing little ability. Necromancy is only in 26% of Victor decks. If you're playing Victor, just pick up Necromancy. It's such a good card.
Matt, I'm going to yes and you here. Not only would that be a good pick and it's underplayed for that particular deck, I think in general, that card needs to see more play to meet up to the level of where Animate Dead is at, because they're both very, very, very good. Animate Dead currently shows up in 225,402 decks total on the EDHREC database. That's 9% of decks that are eligible to play it are doing so. That is huge. And Necromancy, which has a very, very similar effect and that potential flash one-turn reanimation ability, is only showing up in 73,401 decks. So that's 3% of decks that are eligible to play it. The availability of the card, huge factor for sure. But Matt, I completely agree with you. That card needs to rise up to the level where Animate Dead is at, because it's a very good piece of cardboard.
It's so good. And the 1 mana extra for effectively the flexibility that you're gaining to cast it at instant speed, that's worth more than 1 mana with this type of effect. So absolutely love it, Joey. I just thought you would really enjoy my challenge this week. So I'm trying to gain some favor because I'm guessing I beat you like 7 games in a row at MagicCon Vegas this past weekend. So
wow,
maybe that's what I'm doing.
Wow. All right. Listeners, in a future episode, we'll know whether his prediction there actually comes true or not. But we all know it's not going to come true.
It won't. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, you're only going to win 6 of them. All right, Matt, let's get back into our main topic here. As you said before we had our break, went to challenge the stats, we did, plenty of critiquing of a system that Wizards had proposed with the brackets and all that. But we don't just want to malinger on like poking holes and stuff. We do also want to find like other solutions and be hopefully part of proposing something else that could work in the future. And I think to do that, it's probably important for us to kind of get back to base principles and ask ourselves, really, what is it that we hope to get out of whatever power level system does exist in the future? Like, what are the things that we want from a power level system?
Well, for me, the number one thing that I want, and I know that I've said this a lot over the past month, is I want it to be a tool that helps advocate for players who specifically don't know how to do that quite yet for themselves. That is just the number one goal. And so if anybody on Wizards of the Coast is watching this episode, that's my number one piece of encouragement to the team, is it has to be grokkable by the players just figuring out what they're trying to do with Magic and advocate for them, because again, it's these little baby seals you kind of have to like guide out into the wild, and you want to make sure that they grow up into big, healthy seals from there.
I wonder what we're going to put on screen for that image. Sorry, that's just very, very funny to me, Matt. I love it.
There's seals in Magic.
Yeah, that's huge. And also another thing that you and I both kind of wrote down in the show notes separately, but that we definitely converge on, is that simplicity is a really big, key, important thing here.
Absolutely.
As much as I don't want it to like come off as like a punctuation mark, something that like replaces a conversation, I also do understand that like you can't have an enormous pull a wheel out a chart and like point to the whiteboard or whatever. Yeah. It's got to be crazy easy. It's got to be so easy, because we're here to game. Like, we do want to get to the games more quickly. We're not trying to stop people from gaming, and you have to have something that is very easy, very simple to interpret, that assists that. A tool like a hammer ain't complicated.
Hopefully it's not just a hammer. I don't think that's the right tool for this, but I get what you're saying.
Screwdriver, it's
got to be easy to use. It's got to be easy to pick up on. Explain it to people going to their first Magic Con ever, and a judge can explain it to them. Okay, well, like this is for the whatever, and 30 seconds to explain the whole system there. That's absolutely huge. I've seen some people coming up with what they think is a good alternative to the bracket system, and it's completely overblown and overthought. And I think so many folks, the temptation is to overthink things and overcomplicate things. And that is the number one downfall of whatever system is going to be decided upon by Wizards of the Coast, is if you overcomplicate it, it's going to fail.
We see those crazy long posts on Reddit, things like that, and they're just hard to follow.
Yeah.
Yeah. The simplicity is a very important ingredient in this.
Yeah.
But I will again reiterate that another thing that I want from this type of system, the ease of use is huge, but I kind of personally hope that any system that does exist, and I keep kind of going back to this, but like the problem with my deck as a 7 wasn't just that it was more often than not kind of inaccurate, but it also ended a conversation. And I almost wonder whether like the fact that we're using numbers to try and describe something as complicated as decks and social interactions, whether that ends up being part of the problem. I would hope that any system that we do come up with actually subtly encourages people to continue discussing a little bit more, rather than feeling like it can ever be used as the end of a conversation. Whatever system we do, if it proposes dialogue, if it asks a question, whatever system we end up with, that feels like it could end up being more constructive, because then it is definitely an aid in those pregame conversations, which is what this all needs to be.
Having an x-axis and a y-axis, that's not it. Like, you shouldn't need to plot what you're trying to do. I struggle with a lot of those solutions. So yeah, absolutely, opening doors to conversation should be a big feature of whatever the system looks like.
Yeah. I also, and I hit upon some of these points earlier on in the show too, but like those were some of my critiques with other things that have been proposed. But another thing too is that like I want us to have a system that encourages us to play precons against other decks too, because that to me, the appeal of a precon is grab it off the shelf and you can play it against sort of whatever, rather than something that makes us feel like we shouldn't play precons against other decks that are a little bit tuned or something. Like, no, those totally belong, because some of those decks, like the Valgavat deck, they really hold their own. The Bellow deck, goodness, it really holds its own really well.
The Bellow deck is just bonkers. I got trucked so hard. And I was playing like a fairly tuned deck too. I was playing my Ukima and Kazir deck against an out-of-the-box Bellow deck, and I got thumped.
Yeah, that deck's very, very good. And one other point too, if at all possible, I do hope that some type of system can attempt to limit the damage that can be done by people who are trying to game that system or trying to angle shoot.
Sure.
Again, those types of players will always exist. I think this is why Wizards of the Coast has expressed a lot of hesitancy over doing a points system, the way that Canadian Highlander does their stuff.
Yeah.
They worry about people gaming that type of system so that they can, shoot under it and still create like just, total a raffle stomp type of deck for other people. That's obviously something that you want to try and limit if possible. I would love for some type of system to help avoid that, but I also understand that there's sometimes only so much that you can do, and at the end of the day, there's a difference between a problem system and problem players. And if there's a social issue, we should respond in a social way. No system is going to be able to prevent us from our responsibility for defending the experience that we want to have at the table when it comes to the problem players doing that type of stuff too.
Yeah, a point system I think is a noble thing, and it works really well for Canadian Highlander and the player base that gravitates towards that. And the professor over at Tulare Community College did a really good video and made very compelling arguments. I will give a ton of credit over to Prof for the video he put out there. But I think, again, it comes down to, are we overcomplicating things? Are we requiring players who don't know how to kind of talk about their own decks? Are we requiring them to do too much homework to start playing Commander, which is the most played format in Magic the Gathering? I think we can't overcomplicate things like that, where Canadian Highlander, again, those players, I don't think anybody's, oops, I'm playing Canadian Highlander, I'm playing Magic. That's just not how that format works. Whereas Commander, I think folks absolutely do. And so I like the idea of a point system, but I think, again, the biggest flaw that comes down to so many of these systems we've seen is it's putting too much homework for newer players to do.
Well, in Canadian Highlander, where your only goal is to defeat one other person, Matt, I'll fight tooth and nail to do that in a one-on-one format.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so gaming that system is the point of the point system.
Yeah.
Like, that's fun there. And there's a deck building, part of EDH2 that is also a big point of the format. But the point of EDH isn't to tear your opponents down as quickly as possible. It's about vibes. It's the kind of a beer and pretzels format for a lot of people.
It's a social it's a social format. It's not a competitive format. And I think that is a huge thing that needs to be kept in mind, where We're all about encouraging social interactions, whether it's through the gameplay, whether it's through the pregame conversations. You have to be social to do this.
So that kind of begs the question, Matt. Would, for instance, using the salt scores that appear on EDHREC be ever a useful... Okay, that was a fast response. Let me cut you off.
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not. And we've gotten a bunch of folks that have been asking us if we think Wizards of the Coast should use salt scores instead of a power bracket. No, they absolutely should not for any sort of point system substitute. Just no, it's not measuring what the power brackets are trying to do.
Yeah, they do feel like two very different things, and that is my objection as well. Probably not as strong an objection as yours, but like there's a difference between power and salt.
100%.
One of them is catching vibes, one of them is catching like how freaking powerful these cards are, and there are powerful cards that aren't salty and salty cards that aren't powerful.
Yeah, like Rachel Weeks on Command Zone has stated, like the format's all about vibes, and that's what salt score is measuring. It's, are you harshing the mellow of any certain game, and what cards are doing that? That's what salt score is out there measuring. It's measuring the social scale, what are people feeling when you're playing high salt cards. It's not measuring power at all, because there's, like you said, Joey, there's a ton of powerful cards that don't show up on salt scores at all. But then like Spinny Ride has a salt score of 1.71, and nobody knows what the card does because nobody plays it because it's an uncard, but also it's not particularly powerful. But it's the exact same salt score as Collector Oof, which is objectively very powerful.
I think salt is extremely useful at cluing you in on cards that can cause a big reaction from other players at the table. But understated cards may not create a big reaction from other players, but they can still be very, very powerful and help you win a game, and therefore not promote a big salt score.
Yeah.
Or Scrambleverse, those types of cards as well. Those cards have higher salt scores because they're kind of like that's a little bit annoying, but I wouldn't call Scrambleverse a necessarily powerful card.
Right.
And Matt, you just named Spinny Ride, which is an Unfinity card that does attraction stuff.
It's an attraction, yeah. I don't know what that means, but it's an attraction.
Right. Not powerful, but like attractions, they're a bummer. Like there's a lot of people who are like, don't really care for that. Of course, talking about this begs the question, should, in that case, this type of system that we develop, should it only be about the vibes and not about power?
In some worlds, that might be the case. I don't think that is for here. But I think it's just a nice, interesting data point for people to have going in. But yeah, like Spinny Ride having a higher salt score than Vampiric Tutor, a card they use to narrate, this is one of the most powerful cards of the format. This is what you can start to expect. That's something that I think kind of shows like the salt scores are good. They're helpful, but they should not be used as a way to kind of gauge, okay, this is absolute power or this is not powerful, whatever. Because absolutely, it's got a lower salt score than all of these.
Right. And so the reason that I would say that just leaning into the vibes part of it and ignoring power, that is also just as bad of a proposition. We actually do want to try and find something that helps you accomplish both. And I think an example of this kind of took place on Reddit, I believe, was taking Wizards' bracket system and doing a bunch of community voting on there to try and see where people fall and what they expect cards would line up in.
Yeah.
And it does kind of seem to me, based on some of the results that they found, that they would not necessarily be on the same page as where Wizards of the Coast is at. There's a big discrepancy there. Mm-hmm. So Matt, as you said, is all about reading the vibes, but like power can also be a big part of the vibes, and there being a big disconnect between the player base and the company, that doesn't feel good to me. And so whatever system we do find, I hope that it can be more of a fusion rather than like a complete divide like that.
Yeah, it can't be all or nothing. It's got to be some sort of blend of the two. And we're kind of trying to narrate this out that you can't just use salt score to gauge power, because again, they're talking about a power bracket. They're talking about a power scale, which means that yes, a little bit of salt should be influencing it, but not entirely. Again, we appreciate folks who really think that salt scores should be used more. I think that they're not really accomplishing the goal of that though, because if you told me Worst Fears was a more powerful card than the Dragon, anybody would laugh at you. But the Worst Fears has a higher salt score than the Dragon, so there's something to talk about for sure, but it should not be considered or be misconstrued, I guess, for how powerful a certain card is.
Well, and so Matt, this kind of actually gets back to something else that we kind of hinted at earlier. I personally have a handful of frustrations about using numbers in general.
Sure.
I feel like once we start getting caught up on numbers, we start to feel like we got to make sure that those numbers align, rather than it makes us lose focus from what the actual goal is, which is, again, player satisfaction. We want players to have good games against each other. And something that we kind of hinted at earlier, maybe removing number system, using something more descriptive, that's actually something that Dana has been proposing, been a big proponent of for a bit. In a past episode, he mentioned, just likening EDH to pickup basketball versus college basketball, or like a rec league at the YMCA.
Yeah.
And whether simply descriptive terms like that can actually be a little bit more effective than having to rely upon a number. What do you think about like shifting away from that kind of thing and trying to find something that's a lot more descriptive instead?
I really like that idea, actually. Some of the best pregame conversations that I've had was people sitting down and say, okay, what are we playing for? Are we playing for guts or are we playing for glory? And so simple questions like that, questions that are interactive and get the table and the conversation moving forward, I think is super, super helpful. And like I mentioned before, like maybe it's social, tuned, focused, whatever, like, oh, it's tuned. What did you tune around? What did you focus on? I think those are really good things. And like, I obviously, the specific examples that Dana had, I don't think would translate super well from sports ball to Magic the Gathering, but I do like the principle behind that of, okay, are we playing amateur? Are we playing collegiately? Are we playing professionally? Whatever that looks like. I think words to describe instead of numbers is going to help, because that can kind of get players talking about the intent that they put into decks, which is something super helpful, because sometimes I don't mean to build a deck super powerfully, and so I want to test out, and if I need to talk about it differently the next game because, I found a synergy that I didn't really think about, then you can kind of adjust from there.
I also, I don't like using numbers because of it always ends up feeling to me a little bit like that ends a conversation, or it feels like, oh yeah, my deck is a 7. Mm-hmm. And while numbers feel more objective, I don't know that that's always true. I think people hear like, oh, descriptive words. Well, those can mean a bunch of different things to a lot of different people.
Sure.
But I feel like even a 7 wound up meaning a lot of different things to a lot of different people as well.
Very obviously, yeah.
But there is definitely like, it does seem harder to get everyone on the same page when you don't have something necessarily as concrete. So that's certainly a flaw in this type of deal. But it does at least ultimately acknowledge that, like, yeah, Commander is 800 different formats in the same format. And so trying to get on board with whether you're playing standard or vintage or modern or legacy, when all of those things actually exist under the same multiplayer umbrella, like that does seem helpful. And it is ultimately what I would like to try doing as well, is like, let's just describe. But players definitely seem to run into some worries about it. Mm-hmm. Are they giving away too much information, for instance, is a big worry that I see a lot of people do. And they worry that it takes even longer to have that conversation. And they do want something that is hopefully easy, simple. I can point to this and it does a lot of the communicating for me. Because again, not everyone is equipped with all of the right words to be able to communicate those issues. So there are flaws with like being more descriptive that definitely still come up, even though I do generally prefer it to like a 4, a 3, a 7, or whatever.
See, I don't even think you need to overshare, because I would rather overshare than undershare. And I know I've gotten a lot of flack for saying that before, but like,
no, I'm with you.
Really,
I agree.
Like, the pregame conversation, it shouldn't take more than 30 seconds. Like you can make it as simple as like, a pickup line about your deck. Like, okay, swipe left or right on these 3 decks. And like, that's as complicated as it needs to get. Just asking a question to the table, that's the number one most helpful thing that I've found, is just you propose the questions, not just, well, what do we want to do? But like, okay, what sounds the most fun to you? This, or this? And just the table guiding it from there. Those have been the most effective and quickest pregame conversations. And we've been shuffling up within 30 seconds. I get that, like, people they don't want to give away too much about their deck. I understand, but also, what is there to lose that like can't be gained by just having a good game of Magic the Gathering with strangers?
I really like the idea of swiping on the decks, actually, Matt. Like, which of your decks I swipe left and right on? Honestly, that sounds very enjoyable to me.
Well, I'll make sure I'm only bringing a handful of decks to Vegas, so I'll just sit down and it's like, okay, swipe left, swipe right, do what you do.
Yeah. And I, again, also feel that, like, I'd rather overshare, but I understand why a lot of players are like, yeah, but then I ruin the surprise. Even if they're not trying to, like, plan something overpowered, they do ruin a little bit of the surprise of what their deck is able to accomplish. And so I understand some of the hesitancy to that. But again, I feel like the conversations we end up having about Rule Zero talks are so much bigger than actual Rule Zero talks end up being.
And what I've actually seen a lot happening, Joey, is people will think Rule Zero and they think a pregame chat, it's a huge long thing, whereas, the game theory behind it and everything. Well, no, it's the same thing. You don't have to overinflate the importance of whatever you want to call it, because it doesn't have to be that big of a thing.
I think that comments that we see like that, where people do characterize Rule Zero as taking up a huge amount of time, I don't think they're logically true. I think those are just emotionally true things. People are conveying that this takes up a lot of anxiety or dread in their brain because it just feels so daunting, and all they want to do is just freaking play the game. So like, why's it got to be a big ordeal? I think that's all that people are trying to communicate with those, and it does kind of suck. But like, the reality of it is that like, when done, it can be pretty dang quick. I do still ultimately understand, though, why people do want to find something that feels concrete. Like Wizards even pointed out in their stream that they notice that players really like that. So they want to try and provide something that's just like, here's something simple that they can point to that will hopefully be a tool to promote the dialogue. I have my doubts about whether the current bracket system actually does promote that dialogue. But I understand why people do want something that is easy to point to try and demonstrate a lot of stuff that your words can't always do, or that you don't always feel equipped to be able to say. Because especially if it feels like it's daunting or anxiety inducing.
Well, Joey, there's one system that we haven't talked about yet that I know that you're a big fan of, and that is the asking the question of, around what turn do we think the game's going to end? That's a really good question that I think you've been a very, very big advocate for. What do you think that system offers over kind of the other ones that we've kind of thrown around for this episode?
So I, again, don't care for using a number, but if you absolutely need to find a number, I personally have yet to find any system or any number that works better at aligning player intention and helping players to get on the same page than just saying around when the game might end. Because, you know, even if we're all playing 7s, or if we're all playing 1s, or we're all playing 2s or whatever, if the game ends on turn 4, people probably may not all be satisfied in that game. And that seems very possible for everyone to be playing a 1, but then the game ends really, really quickly. Or the game takes forever and everyone's a little bit like, oh, this is dragging on for a really long time. The idea is about getting onto the same page with what is our goal, like the goalpost that we're all aiming for. And I don't want us to get all caught up on like, what are we all wearing? What is the different car that we're all driving? What are the different pieces of equipment that we brought into? I feel like we get a little bit lost in the weeds in that way. So when we just ask around what time do we think the game might end, I think that kind of helps center everything and kind of gives an expectation about one of the most important parts of the game, which is the finale part. Will the finale be satisfying? Because I think when the finale is not satisfying, when the game ends prematurely, for instance, that's the thing that causes a bit more of the disappointments in the first place. So if we are able to actually like kind of estimate, oh, roughly we're aiming for this long of a game, then that kind of means that everyone's going to be like, all right, cool, I'm excited to aim for that. And that tends to be the only question I need to ask.
Yeah, and if your pregame conversations have led you to having good experiences, I think it's a very healthy thing to have in your back pocket if folks are kind of wandering around the conversation, trying to figure out what they want to be playing, what they want to be doing. But I do see why that would be helpful too, because again, if you need a number, sometimes just players need like something concrete. That's one thing that Wizards Coast has said that players need, and I think you've kind of noticed that too, talking about the system. But I think my only big piece of criticism is, again, it puts a lot of homework on the players. You have to know your deck in and out to really know the strategy, to know how long it takes to set up. You need reps with a deck to know how long it takes for a deck to win that you can't always get just by goldfishing, just by looking at a deck list.
So definitely understand that. Here's the reason I don't think it's actually as big of a worry as it initially sounds like it could be. If you don't know what turn your game, like what turn your deck is going to end the game, if you don't know it's turn 7, turn whatever, I already know I'm not worried. Like, I think the only people that I am worried about are the folks who do know, I can combo out with Thassa's Oracle and Demonic whatever on turn 4, or the people who are going to create a really big stack slog that will go past turn 15 or something like that. Those are the outliers. And a question like this, to me, it is just about getting rid of those big outlier situations. In general, if everyone says, oh, I think the game might end around turn 8, but they misjudge that a turn, or the game actually goes to turn 12, I don't care. That sounds great. We're all in roughly the same ballpark. It's getting the outliers onto the same page so the turn 4 folks can find the other turn 4 folks, and the precon players can play against tuned decks that all still land around the same general area. That seems like the extremes that we have to make sure that we account for, and just having a rough ballpark is really quite okay with that. And if you know that your deck is doing something pretty gross, then in that case, you know what your lane is. And if you don't know, then I already know I don't need to worry about that because we're probably already on the same page.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, what a system like this doesn't account for is the types of things like combos or mass land destruction that often characterize things that can happen in a game that players don't necessarily enjoy, that they don't like very much. Obviously, you could play a turn 8 or turn 9 type of deck, and your deck could contain one of those, and people could still be soured by that particular experience, even if everyone was roughly aiming for the same goalpost.
Yeah.
My thought there is that a lot of those things are already so big or so egregious that I feel like those mostly already self-report. And also for me, it feels better than trying to lump all types of combos into a specific range or anything, because I think combos are very diverse. A combo that happens on turn 4 is very different than a combo that happens on turn 12. I don't think all combos are inherently bad. So that's the kind of thing that I hope paying attention to the endpoint kind of assists people with. Figuring out not just what are we playing, but where are we going seems important when we're all getting in the car together. I really like the way that the Legendary Creature podcast has characterized this recently, where they said that Commander is a multiplayer game that someone happens to win. I think that's such a great characterization.
I think that ultimately it's going to come down to what can the community really rally around? What can they kind of tune whatever this existing system is that we have now and just refine into something that players will actually use? Because ultimately that's the goal. If players aren't using it, it's a failure of a plan.
Sure. Something like a turn count is just a simple number, but it is, of the systems around, the kind of thing that at least is focused on the end destination and what might produce satisfaction from players. I also feel like it has built-in accountability. If a person deviates super strongly from what they said their deck was aiming towards, like if instead of winning the game around turn 8, it ends on turn 3 or something like that, that is the kind of thing that makes it easy to identify a bad actor. I think focusing on what the end might look like doesn't force you to give anything away. It invites people to figure out ways that they don't want something to end. It makes it obvious when someone deviates from the travel plan that the entire group was hoping to experience. It still totally allows for you to play precons against tuned decks, for instance. It doesn't get you caught up on individual cards or claiming that certain synergies or strategies are inherently OP. And while, Matt, you're totally right, it does take some intuition to figure out where your deck will actually end. Like, when can your deck truly find its way towards a meaningful endpoint? Really, all you have to do is aim for a general landing zone, and I think that lands everyone in a pretty great space together. And also, as a bonus perk, as a conversation piece, it definitely doesn't last a very long time.
Yeah, Joe, I agree that there is a lot of merits to that. But like every kind of power brackets, whatever it is, system that we've talked about today, there's pros and cons to every single one of them. I don't think there is a perfect system out there. And if Wizards does give us a perfect one in a week or two, however long it takes, and it is perfect, I will be so pleasantly surprised. So I would love to see something perfect. There are a lot of really good minds that are working on this. So I have hope that something's going to work out positively, whatever that does look like.
I do too. I just also hope that we don't end up getting, again, caught up in the weeds. You know, if an entire company is spending a whole lot of time, a lot of manpower, a lot of hours trying to figure out, is this card a 2 or a 3? I think that's work that could potentially be put towards a different use. And I think that there are systems that feel a little bit more simple and don't involve an ever-evolving, ever-growing list of homework that it feels like we have to do to track what our decks are trying to do, that get us focused more on what's happening on the table than what's actually happening above the board. And to me, the point of Commander is what's happening above the board. This is hopefully a kickback and relax beer and pretzels kind of game. Matt, as you said, even small questions like, are we going for guts or glory, can be really helpful in creating an environment where everyone's able to share what it is that they're actually after. Aligning player expectations is something that does take everyone being present for that conversation.
Being honest, present and honest, yeah.
And hopefully not relying upon something else to do that work for you. You know, the Commander deck itself took a lot of work for you to be able to tune and perfect and create the exact experience that you want it to be. Hopefully we can approach some of the conversations that we have during that game also kind of in the same way. I think that's an important step, and it also frees us up to be able to express what the deck is there to do and what we're there to do and what joys we get to share with other people. So I get that it's hard. It's very, very hard. We do need something to try and help. I just hope it can be, Matt, as you said, really, really simple, but also something that people will use and not something that ends a conversation. Just a whole lot of these things, and certainly not a lot of homework.
Yeah, I didn't play very many lessons when Strixhaven came out. I don't want a whole lot more homework. Let's please not give players too much homework to do, because I am not here to sign up for that.
Yeah, ultimately, this just ends up feeling like a very big conversation to happen about a very small part of the game, but that is just how big of a deal it is. I think episodes like this are kind of a testament to how much we all care about making sure that we can find something joyful to share with other people. So a lot of these episodes, I think, end up feeling like kind of daunting. They feel kind of big. They feel maybe even kind of unnecessary to people. But I think it is just about centering ourselves and making sure that we're on the same page with each other about how we can all find fun, even though we obviously all find fun in very different ways in this enormously big format. And Matt, I don't know about you, but I look forward to hearing from our listeners about what proposed systems they have or what feedback they've got for WotC about bracket systems or other potential things to use to try and make sure that everyone can get onto that same page.
Yeah, I mean, if you would like Wizards to see your feedback, they absolutely will. If you leave it in the YouTube comments, they will see your feedback. So make sure you leave it. Otherwise, it's never going to be seen. I don't know. I don't make the rules. I'm just letting you know how they are.
Matt, turning our YouTube comment section into the place that Wizards expects feedback, that's a way for us to boost the algorithm, I guess, but I don't know that we're going to like all of the feedback. Wizards gets a lot of feedback, man. That sounds like a lot to keep up with.
I don't have enough time to moderate all of those comments, but please, we do want to hear your feedback. We want to hear what you all think, because there's, like I said, there's been a lot of really good conversation that, like, I've at least enjoyed hearing a lot of people that I respect talking about this. And so hopefully we were able to weigh in a little bit on this and kind of shed some light on pros and cons on what we think a lot of these systems have. So definitely let us know in the comments what you all think as well.
We're going to call this episode to a close. So if our listeners want to get in touch with us, Matt, where is it that they can find us on the onlines?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform, including Blue Sky now, because that's a thing, at Mathimus55. That's Mathimus 55. And don't forget, we are proud members of Team Ultimate Guard. So if you need some of the best accessories, some of the best boxes, sleeves, and all of that, check out Ultimate Guard to protect all of your valuable cards out there.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me everywhere online, especially on places like Instagram at the handle at Joseph M. Schultz. And you can contact the cast at EDHRECast everywhere online. And if you want to get in touch with us, say a question, a challenge, the stat submission, you can contact us at EDHRECast@gmail.com. Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, please remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.